Thank you for joining Lowry Sports Rhetoric. Tonight's host is Damon Lowry. I'm joining you to talk about the upcoming free agency, specifically for my favorite team, the Chicago Bears. I'm going to go through what I'm kind of looking to see, what I think they might do, and kind of the holes that the team has that need to be addressed. So, we'll start with just new GM, new coach. That makes this kind of difficult. You don't know 100% style of play. Don't have a lot to go on from the GM, but what he has talked about in the press conferences is that he likes to look at second and third tier players in free agency because that's where he feels like the best value comes in. And the coach, defensive-minded coach, came from Indianapolis, so because of Nate's fandom of Indianapolis, I have a decent feel of what style of play that might look like. And then on the offensive side of the ball, the GM has talked from day one that they have to improve the offensive line, and that they have to get more weapons for Justin Fields, and that the offensive coordinator that was Green Bay's quarterback coach, that's kind of his thing, is to maximize the weapons that Justin Fields has, and how he can use Justin Fields' skills the best. So I kind of kept that in mind as I analyzed what we might do in free agency. So first, just going kind of position by position. Quarterback, we're obviously set with Justin Fields, and I wouldn't mind getting a different backup, but I think just financially that doesn't make sense. They got Fields Foles under contract for one more year. Cutting him really doesn't save enough money to be of value. You're not going to find an upgrade over him for the money you're saving in the cap. So they'll probably just hold on to him for one more year and then look for a different backup next offseason once his contract's out, would be my guess. Running back position, I feel like we're really set there. I love Montgomery, and the backup, I always have trouble pronouncing his name, Herbert. Really good backup there. And then Tariq Cohen as a jack of all trades coming out of the backfield is, hopefully they bring him back. There's some talk they might cut him to save some cap space, but I feel like his upside as a weapon is worth hanging on to him. So then you look at offensive line. Obviously, this is where we're going to address. But based on what the GM said, the second and third tier linemen, I have a feeling what they're going to do. The names I looked at, left tackle, I like Morgan Moses or Eric Fisher. Those are older, more established guys. You can probably get them on a 1 or 2 year contract. I think given our cap space and given what's out there on the market, those are two names that I look for. They can come. They're not going to dominate, but they can be solid, and I think that would make a lot of sense for what they're looking to do. And then at the guard position, I think the draft is pretty deep at guard, so they might be able to draft a guard. And then we have white hair, so pretty good there. And then the other tackle, we have last year's draft pick, so I expect him to go to right tackle, and then that's where I think he can really thrive. And then, so that leaves center, which I think is important. I have a feeling, again, that they're going to go for that second tier look. They're not going to go for Jensen, who's the big center on the market. I think they're going to maybe look at, I think it's Baseman or Bozeman. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, from Baltimore. He's a solid center that's, young enough that you can give him a decent contract and hold him long term, and he did a solid enough job for Baltimore, but he's not going to be like that Pro Bowl level, so it's just a good solid pick at center. Or I really like Ben Jones. He's a little bit older, but I feel like he could fit the scheme fit pretty well, and or what I expect that they're going to do, because they talked about doing a Shanahan style offense, and so I think he could do that pretty well, and he has some experience. And so one of those two guys is what I'm looking at, and wouldn't be surprised if those maybe early guys we take, because he can be aggressive going after them as a second and third tier guys. He can go for them first and just lock that position up, because I think he's talked about how center is the most important position on the offensive line, and upgrading our offensive line is his most important mandate for this offseason. So it kind of makes sense to me that he might go for that first. Wide receiver, we are super thin. Mooney, I think, is a great young receiver that has some definite big upside, could possibly be a number one receiver. But there's not a lot behind him right now. So I kind of think the draft is deep at wide receiver. So we'll probably address that. At least one pick in the draft will be a wide receiver. But they're going to have to do something in free agency. Um, they'll probably pick up one or two guys that are towards the back end of the thing. But I think they'll get at least one guy that's in that second tier group. I don't think they have the cap space to go after the big names like Adams, and I definitely don't think we're going to try to maintain having. I think Mooney can be a number one, so we don't need to go after another number one. So what I'm looking for is like I like Chark from Jacksonville. I like Juju Smith-Schuster from the Steelers. I like Russell Gage from Atlanta, and then familiarity with the offensive coordinator Marquez Valdez Sutton from Green Bay. I think all those guys at times have kind of filled a number one role or a number two role because of injuries and looked decent at that, but have been inconsistent. So they could potentially be a number two. If Mooney doesn't go to a number one, they might even in a new system be able to be number ones. And then depending on who you draft, they've kind of been number threes before. So I think that's the right kind of group to look for. You're not paying huge money, and with our salary cap situation, that makes a lot of sense. Tight end, I'd actually like to see him re-sign Jesse James. I think they could do that at a fairly low price, and then obviously our starter that we drafted is going to stay there. I mean, he was a number two pick in the draft. He's had a solid progression the last couple of years, so you're not going to move on from him. So that's what I think out of the offensive side. Go to the defensive side. The first thing I think we're going to look at is Eddie Goldman's probably going to get cut. That'll save you some cap space. I think there's a decent chance that they're going to try to trade Mack, just because you can save a little bit of cap space by doing so. And more importantly, it's really the only asset that makes sense to trade that can get us more draft picks. The previous regime left us with very thin draft picks. Part of the philosophy of this GM is to build through the draft. So Mack is really the only asset that makes sense to me for us to get rid of. He's been injury prone the last few years. I don't think you're getting from him what you really want at this point. And with Quinn, we already have a big time pass rusher anyway. So I think you can kind of move on from Mack at this point, get some draft capital, and that makes a lot of sense. I also like Gibson as a backup that can kind of come in and fill that starting role, or even Mario Edwards as a potential starter because of the scheme. He's a good run stopper. That could possibly work, or they could kick him inside a defensive tackle. Be interesting to see what the coaching staff does with that. I'd like to see them re-sign Bilal Nichols on the defensive line. Young player, shows some good versatility. Definitely outplayed his draft status, his draft pick area. And hopefully you can re-sign him at a decent contract. It doesn't get too out of control. So I'd like to see them maintain him. And then, Hakeem Hicks is a guy that has been a beast for us, but has also been very injury prone lately. If you can get him at a bargain deal, then I think you do it. But if he's looking for, something close to what he's been making lately, then I think you kind of have to move on from that. I'd love for us to get B.J. Hill as a free agent, but we're probably not going to be able to afford to. But from Cincinnati, he played great down the stretch for their playoff run. I'd love to see him, fit in. But if not him, I don't really have a good feel for those types of defensive tackles because the Bears haven't been running that defense lately. So I don't really haven't really paid that close of attention to who's out there. So just gonna have to trust the GM on that. But I'm sure they'll address that position in some way, shape, or form. Probably in that third tier group, like you talked about. Maybe even after the draft, if they don't draft somebody, picking up somebody that's still out there. Going to the linebacker core, obviously Roschon is a beast at linebacker. There's some question as to whether he's going to be in the system that Indy had, if he'll be a Mike or Sam linebacker. I'm guessing Sam. I think he'll be very similar to what Darius Leonard did for them, which was the Sam linebacker for them, I believe. So I think that's I think that is the fit for him. So that leaves us needing a Mike and a Will. Ogletree's a guy that we got for cheap last year. He seemed to fit in well with there's some players from familiarity with him. So I wouldn't mind just re-signing him at a cheap contract again. And I think he could probably fill that Will role. And he actually has some versatility. He could play the Mike, but I think more the Will would suit him. So that leaves us looking at the free agent market for a Mike. And a couple names that they've already been kind of hinted at. The Anthony Hutchinson that just got released from the Chiefs recently because of polls coming from Kansas City. They think there's some familiarity there. But Anthony Walker is a guy that used to be on the Colts. He knows the defense, or he knows the head coach from when he was the defense coordinator there. And he played pretty solid for Cleveland this year. So wouldn't surprise me if that's where we end up going. I think you can get him in that mid-tier money, and he can fill in. He knows the defense, and would be a solid pickup to fill out that linebacker core. At safety, we're set with Jackson. I really think we're going to end up getting a safety in the draft. There's some nice ones in the draft for second, third round, especially if we can trade Mack and pick up some extra draft picks. I think we'll get a safety that complements Jackson well. And then in corner, we got a great number one corner in my opinion. I really like the pick out of Oregon last year, Graham. He didn't get to play till late, but I think he's a good young developing corner. So what I'd like to see them do is just go cheap with veterans, somebody that's familiar with the system. Xavier Rhodes, that was with the Colts, is going to be a free agent. That would make a lot of sense. I wouldn't mind seeing them maybe talk to Kyle Fuller about coming back. I think you can get those guys at cheap. Maybe even sign both of them. I think there'd be scheme fits, and there's familiarity there. So I'd like to see them go in that direction with those two. And then we technically have our punter is a free agent. If he's wanting a lot of money, I think you move on from him. Punter's punter to me. I'd rather go cheap, grab a guy in the seventh round if there's a guy available, or just sign an undrafted free agent. But so that's kind of what I'm looking at. So that kind of rounds out the free agency. I think you could, like I said during it, I think you fill the rest of those holes with the draft, with that safety and wide receiver especially. I think you can fill those holes in the draft. If not, then you're looking for secondary market. But we don't have a ton of cap. We have a decent amount to do some needs, but we don't have a ton. And there's a lot of shifting around that needs to happen to make these new schemes fit. So I think that's a kind of the game plan, kind of the guys you're looking at. You never know, especially with the new GM. But I'd be pretty excited with those names, and it's coming soon. So we'll see who they get, and hopefully this kind of gives you some players to think about as we approach the free agency thing. And we'll talk to you after free agency. I'm sure we're going to be doing a reaction video to free agency where the two of us talk about all the signings, and that'll probably be the next thing after this video to look forward to in another week or two. All right. Okay, this is a little add-on to my segment. Damion speaking again. Obviously, you probably noticed that this was a little out of date on a couple things. I recorded it a few days ago, right before before our new GM decided to announce to the world what kind of GM he is. And I like the moves. I like what he did. The Mac trade, obviously didn't get a second and a third. We only got a second. That's a lot less than I was second and a sixth, I guess. So that was less than I was hoping for. But the trade sets you up with a lot of money going into next year. I think it makes sense to move on from Mac at this stage. And even though I would have liked to have hoped to get more than a second, I think the reason I'm ready to move on from Mac is all the injuries that he's had. So, that's probably the other thing that drove down the price for him. See a lot of people online complaining, thinking that our guy got hosed. We'll see. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. I think getting a second round pick in this draft was a good move for him. And he had to do something to replenish the picks that were given away by the old staff and the moves that they made. So this was probably the only chip he really had to do that. Then the other things, most of the signing or most of the cuts that I said happened. I didn't expect them to cut Trevathan because it was not really, there was no added, they actually pay more to get rid of him than to keep him. But it allows that money to come off the books this year and give you more money next year, which obviously that's they are now in shape to have a ton of money next year. And the Cohen deal, I didn't expect that. I think that's the same as it's similar to Mac. He's been hurt so much, and they must be looking at his medicals and thinking he's not going to provide for him this year. So free up whatever money you can. Time to move on. Um, and then Goldman didn't surprise me at all. And then what else do we? I think that's it. I guess that's all the cuts. It seems like half the team's been gone, but So as far as the free agency goes, I still think probably looking at some is pretty similar to what I said, but in light of how much money they're going to have this year, I think a few, especially I think at left tackle in particular, I look for them really to go after Fisher now, maybe sign him to a 1-year deal. Fisher's still trying to prove that he can come back from the Achilles. He started to do it at the end of last year, but he started to get shaky. So you put him on a 1-year deal, and then it sets you up with all the money you have next year to go after Cam Robinson, who the Jaguars will not be able to franchise for a third straight year. I don't think he wants to stay there, otherwise he would have signed that contract, and he's still young enough that he will be the left tackle jewel next year. So I really look strongly at them doing a 1-year deal with Fisher at tackle, and that will make a ton of sense. And other than that, I think most of what I said worked. One other little thing to add on, probably flew under most people's notice, but a couple years back, the Minnesota Vikings drafted a cornerback by the name of Gaffney. I was super high on him in that draft. Really like his talent. But unfortunately, he got accused of some things that the court system said he didn't do. So he was kind of persona non grata. The Vikings released him. Now he's free and clear. I would love to see the Bears give this guy a chance. He was a second-round pick. He has a ton of talent, and we could probably bring him in on a low deal this year so he can prove it. And then if he fits the defense well and he's the kind of guy they want in the locker room, lock him up next year when we have all that free agent money, and that could solve one of our corner needs. But I still would look at them signing a veteran as well as him, probably like the two that I suggested in the video. I still like Rose and Fuller as possibilities there. Anyway, just thought I would add those thoughts. Don't all the cuts that happen, I don't see a true we got to go get this guy in that group. I think we're going to still be looking at bargain deals and probably a lot of 1-year deals if possible, because I just really think that he's setting up to reshape this roster next year. So anyway, just want to add that on with all the news that happened in the last 2 days since I recorded this originally, and let's hope that we're on the verge of some exciting things, at least to give us some hope for this year. But next year, when it's really going to transform this roster, and he hasn't done anything so far that I don't like, so I'm willing to give Poles the benefit of the doubt.